Qatar quits the oil cartel, becoming the first Gulf nation to do so in more than 50 years. Doha says it wants to focus on natural gas. But is it really about sending a message to Riyadh? I'm Imran Gupta, and today's newsmaker is Qatar's withdrawal from OPEC. Qatar was the first Arab nation to join OPEC once it was formed. Now they've become the first Arab nation to leave. And according to Doha's energy minister, it has nothing to do with the Saudi-led blockade on his country. The 15-member group is responsible for producing almost half the world's crude oil. And while Qatar only produces a fraction of that, its decision could still have a huge impact. On Thursday, OPEC members are meeting in Vienna to try and prop up tumbling oil prices. And with some suggesting the cartel is losing its control over the cost of crude, Qatar's withdrawal is unlikely to help. So, why did Doha leave? And could others follow? Haider Abbasi reports.
After nearly 60 years in the club, Qatar says it's going it alone. The Gulf country is leaving the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC. Doha says it wants to focus on gas production.
So for me to put effort and resources and time in an organization where I'm a very small player and don't have real say in what happens in that organization, practically does not work.
Compared to other OPEC members, Qatar doesn't have much in oil reserves. It supplies 2% of OPEC's annual output. But it's rich in gas. Qatar's production of liquefied natural gas has made it one of the wealthiest nations in the world. Doha insists the decision to withdraw from OPEC is only a business one. But the Gulf country has been under a blockade by its neighbors since June 2017. Those countries accuse Qatar of supporting terrorists, which it denies. The embargo was initiated by Saudi Arabia, which is, in effect, the leader of OPEC.
I think Qatar has been under great pressure from some of its neighbours in the Gulf for some time now, so it is slightly surprising that it's pulling out and then claiming it's not a political issue. It strikes me it can only be that.
The timing of Qatar's announcement is also important. Just days before OPEC meets in Vienna and before the Gulf Cooperation Council meets on Sunday, Saudi Arabia's King Salman has invited Qatar's emir to attend the summit. It's the first time since the blockade started. OPEC was created in 1960. Its founding members were Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, and Venezuela. It's since grown to 15 members. OPEC says its goal is to have a common energy policy and to stabilize oil prices. But OPEC's been accused of operating as a cartel by the way it controls the global oil market. And there's concern that power in the group is mostly in the hands of Saudi Arabia and a non-OPEC member, Russia. Russia is the biggest oil producer in the world. President Vladimir Putin announced over the weekend that his government would extend a deal with Riyadh to limit oil production. In recent years, the rise of US shale gas has diminished the power of the oil cartel. Analysts say this is what's bringing Russia and Saudi Arabia closer together. So could Qatar's exit from OPEC encourage other members to leave the group? And what does this mean for Qatar's relations with its neighbors? Haider Abbasi, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, we have former OPEC senior officer Manucher Takin in London. He's an international oil and energy consultant, and in Qatar's capital is Sultan Barakat. He's the founding director of the Center for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies at the Doha Institute. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Manucher Takin, let me start with you. How would they be feeling within OPEC that Qatar decided to leave? Will they feel sad about it?
Of course they will feel sad. It is like a family that have been together for so many years, since 1960, I think Qatar since 1961 or so. And they have always met each other at least twice a year officially during the OPEC official ministerial conferences. They have also met each other during workshops. Because what you see in OPEC the television interviews and ministers, there's a lot of work going on in OPEC Secretariat in Vienna. And experts from these countries, Qatar included, come to these Economic Commission board or the other research studies, and they discuss the ins and outs of the oil market, the data, policies. So they have been doing this Qatar as member of that family for such a long time, and they will be sad that Qatar is leaving.
Okay, and sometimes it's difficult to leave a family. Sultan Barakat, is this a story about the future of oil, or is it really a story about the future of Middle Eastern geopolitics?
I think it's both. I think for OPEC, it should be a warning for it to look at its own operation, the way it's been conducting its business, the fact that it's been dominated by particularly Saudi Arabia over the last few years. And also it is a little bit about strategic options within the Middle East. But I think as the Qatari minister pointed out, for them it is about efficiency first and foremost. And I believe that is absolutely correct given the working of OPEC in the last few years.
Manu Chair, the fact that it's a Saudi-led cartel, is that the crucial factor here, given everything we've seen and heard over the past year and a half since the Qatar Gulf crisis?
No, I think there is a little bit of truth in this, but I think we should not exaggerate it. The differences between the members of OPEC have existed since 1960, for all these decades. And with politics changing, governments changing, there have been friends becoming competitors or clashes in political ideology, this government, that government. Iran and Iraq were at war with each other, and now there is, of course, a little bit problem between Qatar and the Saudi, UAE, and so on. Iran and Saudi Arabia, according to newspapers, have political big differences, but of course, these things are natural. But within all this period, the ministers, when they get in Vienna or wherever they meet for the oil market analysis, they really are as business people. And it is not arm twisting because of political power and so on. Politics is there, but they put it aside. As experts, as technical business people, they look at the oil market, the pros and cons of a policy option, what they should do or should not do, how it has happened in the last, and so on and so forth. But I don't think the dominance of Saudi Arabia has been there for many decades, but the Saudis, as His Excellency Minister this time, and in the past, they have always acted rationally and politely with each other, and there is a stronger bargaining power with Saudi Arabia. And sometimes some countries have overproduced. Saudi Arabia has overproduced beyond in the last 5-6 months. But Venezuela overproduced for 4 years in the late 1990s. So these things happen, these are transitory. And of course, other members get upset, they remind each other. I don't think it is a cause that Qatar is leaving. For me, is a dilemma, is a question mark. I really don't know why is Qatar departing.
Okay, and we've seen some of the responses, and Sultan, if I can sort of summarize some of the responses that we had from the Gulf and elsewhere, and some of the op-eds, they seem to see it as a continuation of the way Qatar behaves. You're a small country, you think you're bigger than you're too big for your boots, so instead of addressing some of the key issues that we mentioned, you just want to protest and throw your toys out of the pram and leave. Is that true in any way?
I don't honestly think so. I think Qatar has a long record of being very keen on multilateralism, on intergovernmental organizations. They're a member of all sorts of organizations. They're often the first to want to be part of a wider community because of their size and because of their wealth and because of their reliance on softer diplomacy and softer power in terms of conducting their relationships. I think there is something deeper here that has happened that led them to quit OPEC. Of course, Qatar is not the first country to leave OPEC. You remember Gabon did back in the 1990s, although they rejoined. There are other countries, Indonesia, Ecuador, who suspended their membership for a while. So it's not a unique thing to have happened. What is unique is that it is happening now because I think they feel that the decision has been manipulated and really controlled exclusively by Saudi Arabia. The increase in production over the last few months has led to a drop in oil prices from around $86 a barrel to around $60 a barrel within, what, 8 weeks or so.
Right.
And it must be that Qatar, and I suspect other countries, feel that this kind of decision should not be made unilaterally by Saudi Arabia, particularly when it is coming, or it sounds as if it's been orchestrated with the United States and President Trump in particular.
Yeah, President Trump tweeting about it and basically asking everybody to thank him for strengthening the alliance and not hurting the alliance despite the Khashoggi case and other things, and tweeting and saying, hey, oil is going even lower. Where's my congratulations? Manushar Takin, as you look at it, both in a business sense and a political sense, who loses more, OPEC or the Qataris?
I don't think either of them would lose, honestly, because within OPEC, with the production of 32 million, more or less, barrels per day as a whole, 650,000 barrels per day production by Qatar is a small component, a small member. So an actual quantity of oil being exported into the market and so on is not going to change the balance and disrupt the whole thing. No. I think, as I mentioned, they would miss the Qatari experts, ministers, and so on to get together and discuss and consult. All the OPEC members, both on the technical level as well as the ministerial and deputy ministers, they would miss the Qatari counterparts, and they wish they would be there. But without Qatar, they could continue as they have been doing their operations. And for Qatar, also they can continue. We see, of course, Qatar is the major gas exporter, LNG especially, the largest. They were exporting, producing 77 million tons. They are still producing 77 million tons of LNG per year, and they are expanding it now in the next few years to 110. They are a major player in LNG. But let's not forget, although small oil producer, they had opened up 10 years ago, 20 years ago to foreign international companies, and those companies came in, and Qatar's production went up. It's about 650,000. It used to be 300,000 or 400,000. And to produce 600,000 barrels per day, export, let's say 500,000 barrels per 500,000 barrels per day, all these years, is an achievement which Qatar, its company, its organizations of both production and marketing, coordination, that they have alliances, joint ventures with foreign companies, have been doing very well and a very good high level of technology and operation-wise. So again, they wouldn't lose. Qatar wouldn't lose much by being away.
Right.
It is, I think, what Qatar would miss is the information and analysis that OPEC Secretariat does. Qatari experts come and meet, and then they receive the data. That dialogue and interconnection of technical information, analysis of the oil market, and so on, that is what I think they would miss. But again, Qatar is a rich country. They have consultants. They have their own people who, of the years, they know the ins and outs of the oil market. So they wouldn't lose that much either.
Yeah, well, it's yet another crack in a multinational institution. Sultan Barakat, let me ask you about something else. You said this runs deeper. I wonder to what extent you think the U.S. focusing on its own oil and shale reserves has an impact on all of this. A few years ago, the U.S. made a decision. They're going to start to frack and do much more within their own country. And they've been producing much more oil, much more shale domestically. Has OPEC been weakened anyway because of that, so the cartel doesn't really wield as much power as it did in the past? So in a way, one member leaving is not that much of a big deal.
Well, OPEC has been overall weakened in terms of its dominance over the oil market over the last 50 years. And when it first started, it was in control of what, 70+ % of the world share of oil. Now it is less than 35%, I think, or something around that margin. So it's much less important than it was in the past. But to go back to your earlier question, I think Qatar has probably less to lose in this particular move than OPEC. OPEC has an idea for it to maintain itself. It does need to keep as many members as possible within its membership. And I think Qatar leaving could lead to other countries thinking to follow in a similar direction. And I'm thinking in particular Iran and Algeria and others. And particularly if Qatar leaves and then puts its emphasis on gas and look to create a cartel that is gas-led. I think it could be a bad move to OPEC, and OPEC should really look, spend some time sort of self-searching on what are the issues that led a country, although it is not huge in terms of oil export, it's less than 2%, but nevertheless it's an important country in the Gulf, led them to leave, and denying that everything is okay and denying the fact that it is difficult for OPEC, I think will not really help.
Okay, that's interesting. We'll keep an eye on the Iranians and the Algerians to see if there's any hint that they might want to leave, or if there might be a natural gas cartel coming up soon, led by the Qataris. Gentlemen, it's been great to have you on the Newsmakers, Manucher Takin and Sultan Barakat. Thanks for joining us. Still to come on the program, the wives of Boko Haram fighters want to be reintegrated into society, but will they ever be accepted by victims of the armed group? And is it time for Kuala Lumpur to abolish a policy that gives preferential treatment to ethnic Malays? Boko Haram is one of Nigeria's most feared radical armed groups. They're accused of the torture, murder and rape of thousands of people. And many fighters took their wives along for the dangerous ride. In 2014, the Nigerian government offered an amnesty. Thousands surrendered and many wives fled with their children. But they've come back to a hostile reception. Adeshua Josh traveled to northeast Nigeria to speak with some of those women struggling to reintegrate into society.
Zama lafiya haka mun haɗu iyayena sun bashi ni muna zaune da shi a can dai angon Markas ɗin muna zama aka ba mu gida mun zauna so aka zo aka fara wannan akida ɗin.
Aisha's husband joined Boko Haram in its early days.
Ya dawo daga tafiya Muhammad Yusuf kenan sai ya dawo sai yake cewa kowa ina so yau ya zo nan fadar mu zauna muna da meeting sai aka kira su ranar Alhamis sun tafi gurin suna zaune wajen 12.
In 2002, Mohammed Yusuf founded Boko Haram in Maiduguri, the capital of Nigeria's Borno state. His main aim was to rid the country of Western education, which he says is sinful. His ultimate goal is to topple the government and create an Islamic empire. The Nigerian government soon saw Yusuf and his group as a threat. After he was killed in 2009, Boko Haram started a full insurgency under the leadership of Abubakar Shekau. Aisha said she had no choice but to join them. But not everyone joined for religious reasons.
Lokacin da muka haɗu da shi aka mana aure da aka zo aka mana aure ni da shi to lokacin ba shi da sana'a ne yau da gobe haka muna tare da shi har ya zo tsinci kanshi a wannan halin.
Sambisa Forest, Boko Haram's stronghold, is located about 60 kilometers from Maiduguri. The former game reserve is also the site of the Nigerian military's war on terror. Palmata spent years there with her husband, but in 2016, she decided to flee with her 2 children.
Abin da ya kare mu muka zo shi din da kansu suna son su shigo gari suna tsoron shigowa gari ne yasa ba su shigo ba to ni kuma abin da yasa na shigo gari din na shigo gari akan in dai za a zaman lafiya za mu iya mu gaya musu su shigo gari a tare a haɗa kai a zaman lafiya su da kansu jejin ya ishe su ba abinci ba ruwa suna son shigowa gari to tsoro ne yake hana su shigo cikin gari din.
More than 2,000 Boko Haram fighters have surrendered to the military since the government offered amnesty in 2014. But not Palmata's husband.
Kisa ba su shigo ba. Wani kuma abin da yasa na shigo gari din, na shigo gari akan in dai za a yi zaman lafiya, za mu iya mu gaya musu su shigo gari a tare a haɗa kai a yi zaman lafiya. Su da kansu jejin ya ishe su. Ba abinci ba ruwa suna son shigowa gari. To tsoro ne yake hana su shigo cikin gari din.
Okay. But some people are not ready to forgive, especially those who have been victims of the group's attack. Madhu Sharif was a businessman. He and his friends were traveling to meet customers in a city nearby when Boko Haram ambushed his car, shot everyone, and made away with their money. Only Madhu Sharif survived the attack that left him blind.
Haka ne da ni ne nake komai a hannuna, ni nake zuwa kasuwa, ni nake zuwa ko ina, amma yanzu kuma wani abu wasu abubuwa dole ne sai na nemi mutum.
As with many victims, Madhu Sharif thinks the government's priority should be people like him.
Wanda suka yi mana sun kokone garuruwan mutane sun kakkashe mutane. Gashi dai duk abubuwan na hannunmu gashi nan ya zuwa kare. Bayan da zamu ne dan gwamnati ya fi karfin abin da shi ya sa ya zamu da amma ba ka ba za mu taɓa da gaskiya ba da.
Since they left their husbands, Aisha and Palmata have not been able to reintegrate into their community.
Ina da bakin jini a gurin mutane na duk inda na shiga ba sa so na dan abin da yasa yanzu wata bahaushiya ne muna zaune yar Nijar da ita a ɗakin kwano muna zama da ita haka har zuwa wajen shekara yanzu ko wata bakwai ne yanzu watan mu bakwai da ita muna tare da ita muna zaman zanya tafiya unguwa in bar mata ƴaƴana in na da abin da na samu in bata in babu shikenan ita za ta bani mu zauna da ita tsohuwa ne sosai tana tuyan kosai muna zama da ita to mutane na dai ba sa so na
mu zauna zaman lafiya gaba ɗaya mu duka al'umman ƙasa kowa da kowa mu zauna lafiya kamar yadda da gari yake lafiya ba a faɗa ana cin abinci ana kasuwa.
Aisha and Palmata say they haven't spoken to their husbands for more than a year, but both hope they will return alive someday.
Ina son mai gidana, wai dan ba sun yadda zan iya je in same shi bane. Amma an ga gari ya lafiya aka ba da haɗin kai suka zuba da makaman yaƙi wanda suke jeji suka dawo mai gidana zai iya dawowa gurina. Za mu ci gaba da zaman mu lafiya amma wanda aka kashe mishi miji ina tausayin su ni ma yanzu abin tausayi ne tunda ba na tare da miji ga yara yanzu ina tare da mijina ai shi zai kula da makarantar yaran shi da abincin su amma yanzu ya kuma wudi ya koma kaina ne mace wannan abin babban matsala ne.
Mutane sun kai 300 da wani abu an dawo an ce su sun yi saranda an dawo da su da ya kamata da a yi sulhu a basu sai aka zuba su bare.
But if their husbands do eventually return, will they ever be accepted back into the community they used to call home? Adeshewa Josh, the Newsmakers.
To discuss this, let's go to our panel. In Abuja, we are joined by Esther Ikubaje. She's a campaigner for Amnesty International Nigeria. Mike Omeri is a former Director General at Nigeria's National Orientation Agency and was also a commissioner at various government ministries. And Perry Bremer is a presidential candidate in next year's election. I thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers from Abuja. Perry, let me begin with you. These women they call Boko Haram brides. Do you support their reintegration back into society?
Thank you, Mr. Imran, for having me on your show. To Nigeria and the rest of the larger world. On the topic of the amnesty, it's a broad topic, which I believe that, and on whether or not wives of Boko Haram, who may or may not have been involved in terror, and then Boko Haram terrorists themselves should be granted any form of amnesty, which they currently are being given, has certain stipulations according to Nigeria's constitution, which I believe should have to be legally considered. Nigeria's constitution, according to section 175 of the 1999 constitution, stipulates the regulations for an amnesty to be granted. And for any amnesty to be granted, the Council of States must be consulted. So it's not a unilateral decision that we can make, or the president can make, or Nigeria's military can make, as they currently have, because an amnesty has been given, which I believe is unconstitutional. According to Section 175, the Council of State must be consulted, and that includes all past heads of state or presidents, past chief justices, current National Assembly, and so many of these officers, current and past of current and past administration.
Okay. So let me take that and pose it to Esther. Esther, I think the subtext here is that if the Council of States was to be consulted with, we'd probably be in a situation where there'd be no amnesty, because even though Boko Haram has been degraded, they are still out on the battlefield and there's an active war against them, right? So if it was put to more and more people, democratically it would seem, Nigerians, leaders and civilians would be against this sort of amnesty. Is that the way it is, Esther?
So for me, I think the talking point here should be about the issue of stigmatization of women as Boko Haram wives. At Amnesty International, based on the research that we have done, of course, it's very clear that some of these women might be Boko Haram wives, while some of them are being stigmatized because of their association with Boko Haram. So I think that's where we need to start this discussion from, because it's not about the issue of amnesty. It's mainly about reintegration and the palpable fear in the communities in the Northeast about the reintegration of these women back into the society.
Right. Okay.
Based on the research that we have done also, we even discovered, Imran, that in the camps for internally displaced people, these women, no one is even ready to interact with them. So I think that's where we should start this discussion from.
So let me then take up, certainly, and sorry to interrupt you, right, because I want to keep it moving on, and I want to bring in Mike. Let me ask Mike if he agrees that we need to, first of all, look at these women and separate them out and make a decision as to who was more sort of actively involved and who might have been categorized as more active in terms of Boko Haram, and maybe the prospect of amnesty for them, and others who would be further along the spectrum of being victims who were just caught up in something beyond their control. Is that what we need to do, Mike?
Yes, Imran. First and foremost, let's look at it from a wider perspective. There are wives of Boko Haram or insurgents who were accomplices and colluded with their husbands to commit the heinous crimes that we are talking about. There are other innocent ones who became associates of Boko Haram by circumstances, either through kidnap, and not just really a free choice of theirs. We must separate these people, give them the necessary counseling, and involve that, which would also involve a DDR. In doing that, we must also get the society, the communities where these people will be returned to understand that the people coming back to join them have undergone a serious, strenuous process of rehabilitation and counseling. They have accepted and seen reason why they ought not to have joined the insurgent activity in the first place, and the society is now prepared to accept them. Once that is done, even the issue of stigmatization may not arise. But you cannot just wake up in the morning and bring people and say, these are former wives of Boko Haram and you want them accepted in society. The people you are joining, I mean, the communities are left with deep wounds in their hearts of loss of husbands and children and so forth and so on. So we must have a broad-based approach.
Okay, so Esther, would you accept that in some circumstances, particularly if, whether via evidence or rumor, somebody who's being reintegrated into a society has a connection to atrocities, the people in that community who might have lost loved ones are not going to be the most warmly welcoming, right?
Of course. As I mentioned earlier about the palpable fear in those communities, no one will be happy to have them back. And that's where the reintegration process needs to happen. A lot of orientation needs to happen because people want to know what the Nigerian government has done in terms of ensuring justice, particularly for people who are alleged to have committed those crimes. So if women have been identified as being accomplices or have even carried out some of those heinous crimes, of course, there is the role of the state to prosecute and bring them to justice. But beyond that as well, there is need for reorientation. There's a need for sensitization among those communities. The government needs to conduct nationwide sensitization programs in terms of letting those people from the communities know what exactly has taken place. What has changed about these women? What has changed between the time that they were with Boko Haram, whether as women forced into marriages or whether as victims of kidnap? Of course, what has the government done since then? So those are some of the issues that needs to come to the fore in terms of reorientation and conducting community-based sensitization programs, particularly on this issue.
So, Perry, sensitization, reorientation, rehabilitation, counseling, does the state have the capacity and the capability to do this while it's still fighting a war against Boko Haram?
Thank you. I believe the state has to do it. So even if we have to employ foreign assistance in developing the capacity to reorient, we must do it. However, we cannot step outside the law, and I'm very particular about law and legality. Anybody who has been involved, be it a man or a woman, a wife or a youth, who has been involved in acts of terror which have claimed lives or in rapes of people, cannot be reoriented, cannot be granted an amnesty except under the conditions stipulated by the law. Now, so it's on an individual approach. Those who have not been involved in such things can be and should promptly be reoriented, and we must, including financially and otherwise, make sure that the society is ready to accept them. The terrorists who have perpetrated acts of terror must not be reoriented into society. So the first thing Nigeria has to do is be able to divide between those who have been involved in acts of terror and those who have not.
Criminality aside, Mike, if people have been brainwashed, even though they might not have committed a crime, how do you deprogram them in the Nigerian context? What do you tell them? What do they do?
Well, two things. First and foremost, we must embrace the concept of transitional justice, where appropriate punishment is given to people and appropriate reparation and compensation is given to victims. That is on the one side. On the issue of reintegration and orientation, I run an agency that is in all the 774 local government areas of the country. And I know it has capacity and can develop social psychological messages that will help mitigate the effects of the crime committed against the communities and individuals. You see, fortunately, we are a deeply religious nation. And apart from that, we also rely on persons of influence to communicate certain basic feelings that can, help reduce tension in society. So we need to just go back to those. We've always had basic institutions in the communities through our emirs and chiefs and community leaders. We have local government just to strengthen the administration, the processes. And of course, what we need now is a communication from government and everyone that we need to form a grand alliance or national solidarity against acts of terror and terrorism in itself, so that we see less of politicization of the issue and more of thinking as a nation confronted with a challenge that is not just domiciled in the Northeast or any part of the country, but that Nigerians are involved and therefore requires the collective will, collective determination and understanding of the issues. Therefore, we can create appropriate messaging for the communities.
How much harm, and for those who are certainly, and how much harm, Esther, has been done over the years by the fact that the military has also been accused of committing atrocities and has done terrible things to people just suspected of being with Boko Haram?
So for us at Amnesty International, it's more about accountability. We cannot have the issue of reintegration without ensuring justice and accountability. And it all starts from there, because there is need to go back to the drawing board to address some of the underlying issues of injustice, issues of rape of women, atrocities committed not just by Boko Haram, but also by security forces in Nigeria. So there's need for accountability, and that's what we've always called for. There is need for truth-telling. There is need to ensure that women's experiences, particularly in the conflict in Northeast Nigeria, shapes, the policies around ensuring peace, and particularly ensuring a lasting peace in Northeast of Nigeria. So women's experiences should shape that.
Okay, so Perry, very finally, in terms of the international community, everybody's for bring back our girls, but does anybody care about what happens when the girls come back?
It's a big problem here, and the problem is not just with the girls. The problem is with all people of the country. The social welfare for people of the country is horrible. We don't know where a lot of the girls are. We heard, some of them have been taken abroad or helped otherwise. But the rehabilitation, there's an announcement in Nigeria. This is typically how government runs. There's an announcement when things happen, but after that, the follow-up and maintenance is subliminal and woeful. The larger issue here is that it's not just those 200 girls. Those 200 girls were sort of used as a kind of marker for a bigger problem. There are so many, and I'm talking about tens of thousands of other people who have been abducted by Boko Haram and who have been released. And we need to think about this large picture. And there's just no public record of the successful rehabilitation of so many people. And I'm talking of tens of thousands who, and this should be a primary, government project that we should all be able to see and see how far it's going. But it's not so far, the results are, a dismissal.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's been good to learn from all of you today. I thank you so much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Esther Ikubaje, Mike Omeri, and Perry Bremer, thanks again for joining us on the Newsmakers. This weekend, 500,000 people are expected to take to the streets of Kuala Lumpur. Malaysia's biggest opposition party, UMNO, is organizing a rally in protest against the UN convention the government has considered ratifying. It's known as ICERD, or the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. Malaysia is one of only 14 nations that have not ratified it, along with North Korea and South Sudan. Why? Well, in 1969, economic disparity led to deadly riots between ethnic Malays and Chinese. In response, the government introduced what it called the New Economic Policy. It gave preferential treatment in everything from housing to education to ethnic Malays. Known as Bumiputra, or Sons of the Soil, the one caveat was that the policy would end in 1990. Almost 30 years later, it still hasn't ended. And today, it's a source of ethnic tensions. After the Chinese-led Democratic Action Party entered government earlier this year, there was talk of introducing full equality. But standing in its way is the Malay-dominated party which led the country for almost 6 decades, UMNO. Well, to discuss this, let's go to our panel in Kuala Lumpur. We're joined by Charles Santiago. He's a member of parliament for the DAP, part of the ruling coalition. Keith Leong is a political analyst and the head of research at KRA Group. And Luqman Adam is an UMNO Supreme Council member. Gentlemen, I thank you very much for joining us. Charles, let me start with you. So this International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, on the surface of things, it seems a no-brainer. Why shouldn't the Malaysian government ratify this?
Well, I'm of the opinion that it should be ratified. And I think we should go forward with the ICRD implementation. However, given the level of or lack of awareness in the country, as well as misunderstanding of the ICRD, I think has prompted the government to backtrack and to withdraw its interest in ratifying the ICRD. Okay, so Keith Leong, if the government doesn't want to ratify it, from the outside looking in, does that mean
in some way that there's systemic racial discrimination in Malaysia?
Well, I mean, it shows the unique conditions of Malaysia and the limitations that I guess any government would operate under. You know, that race and religion is considered very sensitive. It's considered sensitive for some reason, and it's very difficult for any government to tackle that. And you know, there's often great suspicion over international conventions in general. You know, there was a huge controversy a few years ago over the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, for instance. So it's difficult. I mean, it shows how incendiary, how sensitive race is in Malaysia, even for things which are seemingly sensible like the accent.
Okay, so race is sensitive and incendiary. Yes, there's a history behind all of this, but currently in practice, Luqman Adam, are ethnic Malays pushed ahead of the queue?
It depends on how you interpret this racial split. At this moment, we only have affirmative action, whereby we give what we call this as a certain privilege to the Bumiputras or the indigenous people, because when we agree to the demand of our written British people, the British people they ask us to to accept the Chinese and Indian as the citizen of Malaya at that time. So at that time hello.
Yes, we can hear you. Please continue.
You can hear me. Okay. At that time, the Chinese and Indian already agreed in our social contract that there will be certain advantage for the indigenous people or the Bumiputras, and there are actually 4 main privilege given to the Malay people, which is the Islam will be the what call this as the national religion, and then there are certain privilege, Malay rights, Malay privilege.
So Luqman, okay,
and then,
okay, fair enough. Luqman, allow me to come in here. So can you be for all of this still being preserved and sustained, and still be against racial discrimination, or do you have to accept that, okay, we have to racially discriminate in order to keep our society going?
No, at this moment, for the past 61 years, this policy, this affirmative action policy, this positive discrimination have been proven. It is able to to make the gap between the rich and the poor, especially the Bumiputras, which are considered as from the bottom.
And
B40,
Luqman, if you'll allow me to come in,
40,
okay, and that's the thinking behind it. Hold on for a second, Luqman, for a second. So Pakatan Harapan wants to ratify this anti-racism treaty. Is it going to be wrong? Do you believe ethnic Malays, Bumiputras, will lose their privileges then?
Yes, yes. If that happened, at this moment, even though they did not ratify ISET, what happened for this 2019 budget? All the privileges given to the B40, to the bottom 40, most of the bottom 40 are Malays and Indian. All of it have been taken back by the new government, even though they are spending more next year. But most of the perks given to the needy from this Bumiputra sector.
Okay, so that's the thinking.
Have been taken back. And
so
I believe.
Hold on, Luqman. Give me a second. Luqman, give me a second. I want to bring in Charles. Charles, so what we're hearing from Luqman is essentially the 70% still need that affirmative action, and this policy is still sound. Changing it or even ratifying a treaty which says discrimination is wrong is going to upset the apple cart. Tell me what you think about that, Charles.
I think Lokman is a propagandist who really has not read the ICERD. For one, ICERD allows for positive discrimination, for positive affirmative action for the majority. It allows for the new economic policy type of programs to be implemented. So there will be no discrimination of the existing support.
But
that
only
the government
for a
is
certain
giving.
period.
Hold on.
Only
Let me finish.
period. That is what we disagree.
Let me finish.
When
No,
we want to sign.
Let me finish. Let me finish first. I think one should not be spewing false information.
Let him finish.
Let him finish. Right. That's one. And number two, to say that the Pakatan Harapan's
did not agree
support
with
for B40 under the new budget does not help the Malays is false. It's absolutely false. He has not read the budget. The amount of money going to support the B40, whoever it is, whether it is Malay, Chinese, Orang Asli, or Indians, have a greater support now than ever before. And I should remind Lokman, that it is UMNO that impoverished the Malays.
That is not true at all.
It is people like him and his
last year,
who impoverished the Malays in this country.
We have spent
And they are using
Charles.
Gentlemen,
can we both take a breath? Can we both take a breath? Okay, Lukman. Okay, Lukman, come in. Lukman, come in. Charles saying is, you guys impoverish the majority. Go ahead.
Irrespective of their religion and irrespective of their race. And we have
it is UMNO that impoverished the Malays. It is UMNO that stole from the Malays.
Okay.
For example,
that's a fact.
the
who money for the one MDB?
Okay. So clearly, gentlemen, if you'll allow me, I'm going to jump in here. Let's take a breath. I want to bring in Keith, who's been sitting there quite politely and calmly for the past few minutes. So Keith, clearly two differing opinions here. Lukman saying we need this to continue. Charles saying this is disingenuous, and he hasn't even read the ICERD. Lukman hasn't even read the ICERD, according to Charles. Where do you stand on this, Keith?
And Imran, just for your information, the policies need to carry on. Nobody is going to support the program for the Malays or the Muslims, whether they are in Peninsular Malaysia or Sabah and Sarawak. So there is no question about support for the Malays. It is UMNO's propaganda, including PAS's propaganda, that is turning it around.
Okay, Keith.
Okay, can you ask?
Hold on, Lukman, let's give Keith the chance and then you come in.
Indigenous, the Malays.
Keith.
How many percent?
Lukman, I promise, once Keith talks, you get a chance to talk for a couple minutes. Go ahead, Keith. I'm going to give you a chance, Lukman.
You can obviously see how
Lukman, if you continue to jump over the other guests, I can't give you a chance.
People from DAPs and PKR, whereby most of them are Chinese and Indian. And these people, they are actually...
Lukman, could we give Keith a chance, please? Lukman, could we please give Keith a chance? I beg you, can we give Keith a chance to speak?
To be given the citizenship.
Lukman, could we please give Keith a chance to talk?
Malays will be given this small privilege, which is Islam as their national language, as their national religion, Bahasa Malaysia as their national language.
You're just going to keep on talking and not allowing the other guys to talk. Lukman.
And also the position of...
Lukman. Keith, go ahead.
Well, you can really see how deeply polarized the society is in Malaysia. There's such divergent views over ethnicity, over religion, and it shows really the great divide that needs to be bridged. That our political leadership on both sides of the fence needs to bridge to reconcile these two very, very different views on race in Malaysia, on religion in Malaysia, and closing that gap. That will be the challenge for Pakatan Haram and also for the opposition, really. But if the opposition is really going to be so blatant about it, so it will be so hardline about this thing, it's very, very hard to see how progress can be made in Malaysia. That's the sad thing about it, that the divide has gotten to where we are now.
Okay, so very finally, Lukman, here's your chance. The other two gentlemen are saying now might be the time to have a conversation about this, not necessarily to take privileges away from the majority, but to have a conversation about it. Why are you against that?
So at this moment, our child saying that they can't be Buddhist or they can't be Christian freely in Malaysia. there is nothing, no objection. There is no obstacle in implementing their rights, their religion rights. What we are asking during our social contract signing, we want that this Buddhism, Hindus, Christianity to respect, not to to spread their religion towards Muslim. That's all.
Okay, got it. Understood. Gentlemen, I've got to wrap. Okay.
Free. You
okay,
can
got
see
it.
the Lord Murugam statue.
Understood. You don't want the proselytizing. Okay. Understood. Listen, gentlemen, I've got to wrap.
Is in Malaysia.
I've got to wrap.
You can
Luqman.
see the sleeping Buddha is in Kelantan.
Okay. I've got to wrap.
The longest sleeping Buddha is in Kelantan.
Okay.
You can see
Luqman.
the biggest church in
Luqman, I don't want to do this.
Asia is also in Kuala Lumpur.
I'm going to have to cut your microphone because we have to wrap the show, Luqman. Your point is well understood. Luqman Adam, Keith Long, and Charles Santiago, thanks for joining us on the Newsmakers. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Next time, Donald Trump tries to force clean coal at the COP24 summit to tackle climate change. Will he be taken seriously? Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.